Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez and this is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore the biggest challenges ahead in the country and in the region. In today's program, we take a look at the victory of right-wing politician Iván Duque as the president-elect in Colombia, a man connected to former President Alvaro Uribe and his paramilitary scandals. Duque said he wants to jail former rebels despite the peace agreements and the ongoing peace talks. So what can we expect of Duque in a key country for the region such as Colombia? Let's take a look at it on this video.
Over 19 million Colombians have cast their vote in a historical election process that comes as the first presidential race since a peace deal between the government and the FARC was signed in 2016. The future of this peace process was at the center of this presidential campaign, involving two candidates who represent opposing political projects.
Gustavo Petro has maintained a coherent position regarding the peace accords, defending their full implementation, promoting talks with the National Liberation Army and asking for a ceasefire. Iván Duque, on the other hand, follows the lead of his political mentor, Alvaro Uribe, who is even willing to completely undo the agreement.
The nearly 96,000 voting tables across the country close at 4 p.m. local time. 1 hour later, electoral authorities announced that right-wing Iván Duque from the political party of former President Alvaro Uribe won over progressive left-leaning candidate Gustavo Petro.
I was surprised by the outcome. We believed in the power of Petro's movement. It was an alternative to the establishment. It stood against the drug trafficking and corruption that have been polluting our system for a very long time.
Despite the final results, this is the first time in Colombia that an independent left-wing presidential candidate made it to a runoff, reaching a historical number of 8 million votes, something that for many citizens expresses the discontent towards traditional politicians, as well as the beginning of a change in the country's political culture.
5 millones. In the first round, we won 5 million votes, and on Sunday, we got 8 million. We nearly doubled our results in the runoff. We are going to keep working together in this alliance, especially towards peace. Colombia achieved an important agreement, and we won't allow peace to be destroyed.
Now, the future of Colombia's peace process remains uncertain. But what is certain is that the recently elected Iván Duque will face a broad and diverse coalition that will not give up in defending peace and social justice for the country.
So thank you for being with us, Ivonne. So finally, the elections are over in Colombia and Iván Duque won. Who is Duque? What is Colombia going to deal with for the next 4 years?
Okay, well, thank you, Carla, for having me here. Okay, Duque is a very young man. He's just 41 years old. A few months before the elections, he was mostly unknown. He became pretty famous after Uribe and Pastrana joined this agreement to support him.
The former presidents of Colombia.
Yes, the former presidents of Colombia. Allies, before they were kind of political enemies, but now they're allies. And their support was very significant for Duque. Duque seems to be, since he's young and he has a short career in politics, he shows and gives this image of a non-corrupted person, probably far away from all the political machinery that's behind all the old politics in Colombia. So I think this was an image that helped him a lot. One of these features was shown in between the first round and the second round of elections that we had, because during this period, instead of probably being more stronger in dealing with his arguments and with his proposals towards the Colombian population, instead of that, he was showing himself as a nice guy. Probably he was singing, he was playing football, he was doing some other things that probably seemed to be very appealing for the young electorates that finally ended up voting for him, or probably convincing the ones that were not pretty convinced before that.
So what changed during the campaign for the first round of the election and the second round of elections? We saw a very different Duque at the beginning saying that he will, for example, eliminate the FARC agreement, the peace agreement with the FARC. And then during the second round for the vote in Colombia, he said he wouldn't delete it, but he would change it.
Yes, he was not as strong as he was during the first round, the first campaign, in dealing with his arguments, or probably reinforcing the arguments or the proposals that he had before. Of course, Duque and Petro as well tried to, what's the word, like to soften their image towards their followers and towards the people. He changed a little bit, he moved a little bit from the strong proposal, the right strong proposal of, okay, I'm gonna move everything, I'm gonna change everything. Probably he was aware that this is a constitutional agreement and this cannot be changed. Probably some things can be modified, some things can be worked on, but not necessarily changed. Peace agreements are a constitutional form right now. So what changed? I think he just moved from this right strong proposals, probably trying to soften it a little, try to move to the center. That was the same thing that Petro was doing, probably not to show themselves as the far right or the far left, but to try to move a little bit more to the center. And that is because also, for example, candidates such as Fajardo or De La Calle, who were showing or were representing probably not a far right or a far left, but more from the center, were the kinds of, and they moved a lot of people during the first campaign and during the first elections. So those were the people that needed to be convinced for the second campaign. So that's why probably they both softened a little bit their scores in order to show that they were not as extreme probably as they were before. And that we can see that in the FARC peace agreements, we can see that in the economy as well. In the proposals, for example, or even the proposal that Petro had of reforming and changing the constitution, calling for a reform. So we saw this kind of move from both sides.
So there's a very interesting thing about Duque. He's very much connected to former President Uribe, but that didn't seem to change the minds of Colombians while going to vote.
Well, we cannot deny that Uribism is one of the most, and I think it's the most important political force in Colombia since 2002, since Uribe became president of Colombia. He still has at least the 50% of the population's approval. We have a very interesting country. Colombia, you know, it's based on the cities and the behavior of the people in the cities and the behavior of the people in the periphery and in the extreme and the lost Colombia. So Uribe represents a lot of the strongest feelings of Colombia. Colombia is a right. I could say that is right country, is a very conservative country, and probably Uribe represents those values. Duque, on the other way, even though Uribe is facing legal procedures, he's facing, and he has a lot of questions towards his behavior. He has been related to paramilitarismo as well, and falsos positivos as well, some of very iconic situations in Colombia.
Yeah, this falsos negativos, to explain a bit on how members of the military used to obtain or murder or get people from the communities, from the indigenous communities, the campesinos, and pass them off as former guerrillas.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, that is some of the, probably the most terrible things in history that we can be very ashamed of. But even though all these questions that Uribe faces, he still has a lot of approval because Colombia favors a lot and approves a lot these family values, these open market values that represent Colombia in a sense. So Duque didn't seem to move that far away from Uribe because he still has a lot of pressure, sorry, not pressure, a lot of participation within the political sphere of Colombia and within the political movements and the population as well. But now, one of the things that Duque faces, and is very important, is to distance himself from Uribe. But he faces like this need of a balance between not becoming like a traitor to Uribe and the partnerships that he obtained, but at the same way he has to distance himself a little bit from him, because since he's so young and that he's new in the political atmosphere of Colombia, everyone is going to be paying attention of his first steps. And the ones that are not convinced of Uribe, because they probably voted for Petro and the opposition, will be very careful about what he's going to do. So he has to maintain this balance, because he also has to win a little bit of the opposition, because he faces Congress. So in order to do what he wants to do, he needs to have a coalition, not just the far right that has been being like his what is that? His partner or his forgot the name.
Like coalition, like
the coalition are the ones that have been
alliance.
supporting him. Yes, the alliances.
So
yes.
this sounds, Duque's first moves sounds a lot like what happened to Juan Manuel Santos, if the current president that is on his way out of the office. When he came to power, will you see a resemblance there?
I do, of course, because both of them represent similar values. I mean, we're talking about values of liberty. We're talking about values of market and how Colombia sees the market, and I'm talking about an open market, probably not the protectionism that is a most related discourse to the left or to the center-left parties. He has, of course, a very strong support from Uribe. That's the same thing that happened to Santos as well. We don't know what's going to happen if Duque is going to distance himself a lot from Uribe, but I don't think that's a political, that will be a good move for him. Instead, independently, that's independent of probably what we would like for him to distance from Uribe, but I don't think that will be a good move for him, because Uribism still has is a very strong force. It's the most important political force in Colombia. The difference, there's a big difference between them, and I think that Santos comes from a political family, from a very strong and powerful family that has been in office, in and out of office. They have a strong economic power behind them. Duque doesn't seem to have that in his behind. He seems to be an independent man. Of course, he has Uribe's support, but he doesn't have all this family tradition, and so probably that will produce and will end up in not very strong favors that he has to pay. Beside Uribism, not very other strong favors, because he's very young.
And well, Duque now has to deal, probably one of the first things he has to deal with is the issue of human rights in Colombia. It continues to be one of the main issues dealing in politics, in violence. Everything is connected to human rights. And for example, the killing of social leaders keeps growing in Colombia. How do you think he will handle this situation?
One of the things that I was scared of, and I said that before elections, is the fact that he believes that militarizing and the military way and the military force and empowerment is a way to combat this. And this is something that brings us back probably to the beginning of the conflict. Colombia and Colombia's conflict is a social conflict. And probably that has not been completely understood. So the fact that you militarize, and probably that's one thing that you have to do. Of course, you cannot separate yourself from security and from the military and from intelligence. That's something that the state has to do, of course. But just separating everything and probably not recognizing that the problem is a social problem will then end up in just deepening the conflict. his argument, or his proposal at least until now, is that the military has to be reinforced. This also goes in line, for example, with this social partnership that Colombia has now with NATO. So, okay, I'm going to be your mate here. Probably Colombia is not entering the NATO as a complete state and as a part state.
Santos announced it was going to be a global partner of NATO.
A global partnership, but in a way that, of course, poses on Colombia some duties that they have to be done, and we cannot disconnect the reality that the countries in NATO are the most powerful and militarized countries in the world. So that means that the argument probably is, okay, we're just going to exchange some knowledge, military knowledge, intel.
Santos said.
That's probably the discourse. But that poses some duties on Colombia. So the fact that we need to be, and we have a president now because he's almost in office, with a military discourse, that we have to put this strong hand on the ones that are probably in the illicit world. The fact that he does not believe completely in the peace agreement as well, and all of these international duties that have been imposed on Colombia, all of this represents a big task that I don't think they are moving towards a most social and soft approach to the people, but we're just going to keep on this form that was managed, of course, with Santos and, of course, with Uribe as well.
So the relation with the United States and with the military in the United States, it will become stronger. How does that work for the communities and the Afro communities, the indigenous communities that are the ones that are most affected by the conflict?
This doesn't change at all the panorama that we have of Colombia. I mean, it's almost repeating itself again and again. The fact, and I think the ones that voted for a new kind of proposals, that we had this chance in these elections, that was, I think, for the first time that we have some other new proposals and refreshed proposals, is not going to change. I believe that social communities, indigenous, Afros, and everyone that probably is in this big lost Colombia will remain almost in the same thing, because the proposals that we have, and the economic proposals, our economic market, we have to open ourselves again to financial direct investment. We have to renew probably all the agreements that we have on all these direct agreements that Colombia has with some other countries. So this idea, this neoliberal idea of just opening these frontiers of the global market, prioritizes the capital over the human resource. Definitely. So I don't think they are going to change. They're the ones that are suffering. They are the ones that are probably hidden. They are the ones that are forgotten. And if we don't invest as a country in this social reconstruction, and we don't give these people the economical and the ways to move and to empower themselves and to produce, of course, all these illicit tendencies, and I'm talking about drug dealing and all of this other, for example, the crops and the illicit crops, and all of this will remain very attractive, because there are no social attractive, because the state is not giving and providing them to people. So that was one of the worst fears that we were facing. I hope I'm wrong, but that's the tendency that we are seeing.
And all of this will have its effect on the current negotiations with the ELN, with the National Liberation Army, that are currently taking place in Cuba. How do you see that happening? Because Santos said on his way out, I'm leaving you everything ready. I want a peace deal with the ELN, and you just have to go and accept the peace deal. Will that be possible?
I think that's at stake right now. I'm not very positive about the results. I don't know how the rounds of negotiations are coming, how they are working out. I think the fact, probably the key of this negotiation process will be in the fact that the state recognizes the conflict as a social conflict. I think that's the first issue. And the other thing that comes behind that, or with that, is to recognize this actor as a political actor, not as a criminal. So if the state, and that, of course, it's a responsibility that's left to Duque in this case, in case of ELN, if he is able to recognize that, probably we can work it out. We can work it out, probably, of course, improving all the mistakes and all the FARC's agreement failures, or probably the things that are missing.
What needs to be worked on? For example, the special jurisdiction for peace, yes, that hasn't been implemented yet, that Duque, as a president-elect, goes and tells the Senate that they shouldn't discuss the application of the special jurisdiction, which is a key issue for the peace agreement.
Definitely. I mean, transitional justice is a key issue of a peace agreement. You cannot have a peace agreement without a transitional justice agreement, or at least a proposal, strong proposal, and that is not just a Colombian thing, a Colombian case. That has been done in all of the peace agreements around the world throughout this century and the last century as well. So you cannot just separate those things. Duque's proposal is to change this transitional justice mechanisms that we have, based on the argument that they are criminals and they should pay, and probably the justice will be made until they pay for that. But that denies the characteristic of political actor. It's not just a case of saying, okay, they are just political actors or they are criminals. No, you cannot just state in those big opposite sides. You have to draw a balance between them, and of course you have to make cessions and to concede some spaces to the other ones. So I don't know how the ELN process will come out, because I don't see a big open mind president right now, because of how he deals with and how he has been attacking this FARC agreement process.
Yeah, and even with the announcement of the NATO global partnership, it will mean that there will be new agreements with this government. And I can't help but think that Duque lost a chance to win maybe a Nobel Prize like Santos did, announcing a peace deal, even though it's strange to see a peace prize winner saying they want to be part of NATO, a military alliance.
Yes, it's very contradictory. I don't think any one of us expected Santos just leaving office with this big news in mind. I didn't see that coming. Definitely, I didn't see that coming. I don't think Colombia acceding to the NATO means, or being a global partner with NATO means, okay, we are ready to face this first world challenges. We are a country that faces and is responsible and capable of handling these first world duties, because we are in this level. But at the same time, Colombia is a developing country with big inequities, very poor in most of its composition. So how can we have a country that has a first world duty and obligation and a first world place with the most powerful countries in the world, but at the same time we are facing extreme poverty and being one of the most unequal countries in the world?
And that's going to be a very important issue, for example, in the matters of regional integration. We saw Colombia being part of several integration organizations, maybe playing on both sides, trying to see if the left or the right wing had more power in Latin America. Yes. And how do you see that happening now? Before Santos leaves office, he's been really against the government in Venezuela. So what do we see his games going to be in the next years, maybe closer to Argentina or maybe closer to Brazil? What's going to happen?
I think Colombia faces big challenges now relating to the regional position that he has. First of all, of course, Venezuela. There is a big concern about all the people that is entering the country every day, and it's true, they are facing a big migration problem. Colombia is facing it, that's true. So one of the things that has to be done or has to be resolved is to see if they have open frontiers or not. Probably a similar situation that is facing the U.S. with all that we are seeing with the immigration policies and the zero tolerance policies. Probably that's one thing. There are some people in Colombia, probably the ones that are near Venezuela, for example, that are asking to close frontiers because they are seeing their jobs and their economy challenged because there's a lot of people coming.
But do you see this affecting the way Colombia relates, for example, to Ecuador, to Bolivia?
Probably it will have an impact because it will depend on the policies that it implements. So if it closes frontiers, or if it probably poses some restrictions, definitely that will be seen as a challenge to this integration process. I don't know if Duque is capable of doing something like that, but it's something that is definitely on the table. The other thing, for example, is the Pacific Alliance. Now it's depending in a big way, depending on the results of the elections of Mexico next Sunday. So it will be seen, or probably we'll see what is the tendency that Mexico is going to take, depending on the president of course is going to run office. So I think of course there has been a change in the region about moving now from leaving the left and moving to the right again, right? So we're seeing that. We saw that in Chile. We have that in Brazil right now. We have that in Argentina as well. We'll see what happens in Mexico as well. So I think that depending on how Duque presents himself, how he presents Colombia regarding this very sensitive problems regarding Venezuela as well, not relating directly to the critics that probably he can face or he can state towards Venezuela's government, but to the social problems that are affecting and are beginning to affect Colombia as well. Let's see how it works with the NATO. And there's one thing, NATO and OCDE are placing some new duties to Colombia, and that's relating, for example, to the social security process that Colombia has. Colombia has to implement some changes, some structural changes within its domestic regulation regarding, for example, social policies. So that is a lot of things and measures that have to be taken, and that definitely will move and will position Colombia in a more right, more conservative, and more dramatic and probably stronger, less social measurements that it has to take. So I think that we can see the tendency of how and where Colombia is heading.
Definitely, we'll keep an eye on that as well. Thank you very much, Ivonne, for your time.
Carla. Thank you very much.
So we were talking to Ivonne Tellez, international rights professor, on what the victory of Iván Duque as the next president means for Colombia and how will it affect its relations with the region. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time.